When can the government go after you for dating another person? When this other person is underage, that's when. I'm going to tell you guys a story about a girl that fell in love with her teacher, about a teacher that made the biggest mistake of his life, and about a government agency, the district attorney's office, that went after this teacher with a vengeance, overcharging and over-punishing him. If you like this type of content, please like, subscribe, and comment. I'd love to hear from you guys. Welcome back to the G-Spot, where we talk about true crime, actual criminal cases from my own case files. My name is Dmitry Gurovich, Mr. G. I've been a criminal defense lawyer for over 29 years, and I've got stories. So sit back, relax, and welcome to my world. As you guys know, I'm based in California, but I do take cases in other states, in other jurisdictions, if these cases are serious enough. And this case was serious. It was very serious. I got a call one day from an attorney friend of mine. He said that his sister-in-law, his wife's sister, was looking for an attorney for her husband. Okay, I said, have her call me. What's this all about? He said, look, I better let her tell you. A few minutes later, I received a phone call from my future client's wife. Her voice sounded strained, nervous. She tried to control her emotions, but underneath all that, there was a lot of anger, anxiety, fear, a lot of crazy emotions bubbling up. She told me that her husband was arrested for statutory rape and kidnapping of a student. You see, he was a high school teacher. He taught math to seniors. And he developed a sexual relationship with one of his students. She wanted to pay for his defense, but she wasn't sure if she was going to kill him or let him live after he got out. Now, of course, she meant it rhetorically, but I think she was in more pain than he was. So a few days later, I was on a plane to see my new client. I checked into my hotel and went to see him in jail. When I got there, I presented my credentials and was let in by one of the guards. The whole facility was a faded color of olive, the kind you find in a swamp. It was cold and gloomy. As we walked down the hallway, the echo from our footsteps bounced against the walls. There were security cameras everywhere, observing us as we made our way deeper into the jail. He opened a door into a very small room and asked me to step inside. As I did, he shut the door, and this sound reverberated through the entire facility. It was a place that nobody wants to find themselves in. About 15 minutes later, the door opened and my client walked in. He was tall and slender, in his mid-30s, with thinning light brown hair. His name was Bill, and he had the weight of the entire world on top of his shoulders. He was completely stressed out. He sat down on the other side of the table and started telling me a story. He was a teacher, a high school teacher. There was this girl in one of his classes that kept looking at him, smiling at him. She stayed after hours asking him questions, and one day, when they were alone in the classroom, she told him that she loved him. He told her that, look, this can never be. I'm married, I have kids. This is totally inappropriate. But eventually, temptation won out, and they started seeing each other as a couple. At first in school, in his empty classroom, and then in a motel. It got to a point where Bill and Jenny, that was her name, were actually talking about possibly having a life together. They were in love. She was 2 months shy of 18, and they started making plans, believe it or not. Eventually, she told her best friend, who told her best friend, who told her best friend, until the school got wind of it and called the cops. He was arrested for statutory rape and kidnapping. So let's talk about the law. We're dealing with something called statutory rape. Now, how is that different from rape? I'll give you guys an example using the California statute. The state where it happened, their laws are almost identical to California. So under California Penal Code 261, rape is non-consensual sexual intercourse that occurs through force, violence, duress, menace, or fear. Or, and this is very important, when the victim is incapable of giving consent. And then the statute gives an example. Due to intoxication, unconsciousness, or mental disability. Now, California Penal Code 261.5 deals with statutory rape. It states that statutory rape is unlawful sexual intercourse with a person under the age of 18, even if the sex is consensual. Now, why 18 is important here? The law says that if you're under 18, you're legally not capable of giving consent. It's as if you have this condition of unconsciousness, intoxication, or mental disability that prevents you from being able to give consent. Your age is another condition, and that's called statutory rape. But the interesting thing is that in this jurisdiction, in this state, the age of consent was 16. So why are we even talking about this? Why are we even here? Jenny was older than 16. She was a couple of months shy of 18. But there is a wrinkle. This age of consent grows from 16 to 18 when the adult is in the position of authority like Bill was. He was her teacher, position of authority. The law is concerned that the adult using this position of authority is going to influence the minor into doing this act. And therefore, the age of consent goes up to 18. So if Bill and Jenny met at a local mall and fell in love, there would be no issue because Bill would not be in the position of authority. He would not be her teacher. And because she's over 16, that states age of consent. There's no problem with the relationship. There would be no statutory rape. And there would be no kidnapping. Now, let's talk about kidnapping. What exactly is kidnapping? Kidnapping is defined, and again, I'm using California statutes, but this one is very similar again. And I'm paraphrasing here. Kidnapping is the unlawful confinement or transportation of an individual without the individual's consent with the intent to commit a felony. Let's break that down. Bill took Jenny to a motel, and that was considered the kidnapping. Now, why? He took her to a motel with the intent to commit a felony, like statutory rape, and she could not give consent, according to the DA's office, to actually go to the motel because she's underage. And that's where we had a disagreement, because even though she may not have been able to give consent to have intercourse with Bill, making this statutory rape, she absolutely could give consent to get into the car, to go to the motel. It's a more isolated question. You don't need to be 18 years of age in order to be able to legally give consent to get into somebody's car. But let me tell you what happened procedurally. When I got into the case, I started talking to the district attorney. I was trying to see if we can work something out. Because clearly this was statutory rape. She was under 18, he was in the position of authority, and they had sexual intercourse. There was proof of that. There were text messages back and forth. There were video from the security cameras in the motel that they used to go to. Them walking inside, holding hands, them walking out a few hours later. There were text messages between Jenny and Bill, between Jenny and her friends, where she tells them what's happening. It was pretty clear that they had a relationship. So statutory rape I couldn't really argue against. It was what it was. But kidnapping was a different story. So I had Bill evaluated by a psychiatrist to see if he was a predator or not. The report came back that he was absolutely normal. You see what happens in these cases a lot of times is that the teacher uses his or her position of authority to influence the student, to gaslight, to confuse, to manipulate in order to get what they want. But there was nothing like this in this case at all. I had his family friends and colleagues write letters on his behalf explaining who he was, what kind of person, what kind of father, what kind of teacher, etc. Everybody wrote extremely positive letters. Jenny herself wrote a very long letter to the district attorney's office. She told them that she and Bill were in love, that they wanted to have a future together, that the district attorney interrupted their lives. She explained that she wasn't forced, she wasn't coerced or confused into doing anything whatsoever. She's the one that initiated everything, and she wanted this relationship. The DA and I eventually sat down. She completely dismissed the psych eval, the letters, Jenny's letter, and my arguments as well. You see, our position was that even though this might be statutory rape, it certainly is no kidnapping. Jenny, for statutory rape, could not have given her consent legally to that act. But getting into a car in order to drive to a motel to perform that act, that's a whole different story. You don't have to be 18 or over 18 in order to give your consent to get into somebody's car. Plus, there was absolutely no coercion, nothing on Bill's part. The only difference here was that Bill was in the position of authority. Had he not been, this would be completely legal. I also told the DA that the statute that they were charging Bill under for kidnapping was never intended for these types of situations. It was intended to protect women and girls that were trafficked into the world of prostitution and to arrest and prosecute their pimps and traffickers. Not this. Absolutely doesn't apply here. But the prosecution felt that Bill must have coerced Jenny, and that's what they argued. Plus, this case was all over the newspapers, all over social media. Every time we'd go to court, there'd be cameras and reporters. It was a lot of pressure on the district attorney's office to convict, to show how strong they are, to teach a lesson. And so we ended up going to trial. When I got to court for the first day of trial, it seemed like the whole state had turned up to watch this thing. Everybody was there. I walked in, went through security, and walked into the courtroom. We were going to select a jury, first day. Now, the jury selection process begins with something called a voir dire. This is the stage of trial where we finalize the 12 jurors that are actually going to be listening and making decisions, factual findings in a case. And so a pool of prospective jurors would walk in. We would select the first 12 and start asking them questions to see if they're suitable to be on the jury. If we felt that one or more of these jurors was not suitable, we would ask them to leave for various reasons, and then somebody else from the jury pool would take their place until we were happy with our 12, plus alternates in case somebody on the jury gets sick or couldn't make trial. It took a little while to select the jury, but we finally did, and we moved on to opening statements. The prosecutor was brutal. She literally equated him with the devil. She said that he misled her, he coerced her, he tricked her into doing all these things, which wasn't the case. Jenny herself said that wasn't the case. But that was the theory of the prosecution, and that's what they went with. I did my opening statement explaining our position, and then we were off to witnesses. The prosecutor put her case on. She called in school officials to explain what the policies are. She also called the police officer to testify as to what my client told them when he was first arrested before he hired me. He actually sat down and talked to them, which he shouldn't have done, but he did. And they testified to that in trial. He confessed to having a sexual relationship with Jenny, but he did say that it was all consensual, that they loved each other and potentially wanted to have a life together. You know, the painful part of all of this was that Bill's wife was in the audience every single day, and she heard all of it. The pain that she was going through was unimaginable to me, honestly. This is the person that she had kids with, that she married, that she loved, that she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. And apparently he fell in love with a student and wanted to leave her and have a life outside of his family. Plus, she was paying for his defense. I can't imagine what she was going through, to be honest with you. I remember a few times during the trial, she would run out of the courtroom, sobbing. It was terrible. Absolutely terrible. Eventually, it came our turn. I called Jenny to the stand. By that time, she was over 18. She was an absolute adult. And I gotta tell you, she was a brave girl. She took the stand in front of everybody, in front of news cameras and reporters, literally in front of the whole world. And she said that she and Bill were in love and that he never coerced her, he never tricked her. This was completely consensual, and the fact that she was not 18 at the time should not make a difference. She's willing to stand by everything that she said. Eventually, we ended up at closing argument. The prosecutor basically repeated her opening, that Bill was the devil and he tricked and coerced, etc. My argument was there was absolutely no coercion. Yes, there may have been statutory rape. I mean, that was impossible to argue, to be honest with you. She was under 18 and he was in a position of authority, so statutory rape was there. But kidnapping was absolutely not. I argued that Bill did not coerce her, did not trick her, did not use his power of authority to coax her into the car to go to the motel. She made that decision on her own. I also explained to the jury the only difference between a legal act and an illegal act was the position of authority. If Bill had met Jenny somewhere else, in a mall, in a store, on the street, at a local McDonald's, and they decided to start having a relationship, this would not be statutory rape because the age of consent would remain at 16 and she was almost 18 at that point. To apply kidnapping to this situation was absolutely wrong. What I wanted to continue to argue, and what the judge forbid me to say, is that the statute, this kidnapping statute, was never designed for this situation. The legislative intent of that statute, the reason this statute was enacted, was to combat human trafficking, specifically underage girls trafficked into the world of prostitution. And it was designed to protect them and to prosecute their pimps. Not this, but that part I couldn't argue. We finished, the jury went to deliberate. It didn't take them long. They came out and Bill was found guilty on statutory rape and kidnapping. He was facing a long time. We adjourned and set a date for sentencing. That's when the judge would pronounce his sentence, his punishment for Bill. He was facing a lot of time. He was facing 15 plus years. At sentencing, we again introduced the fact that this is completely out of character for him, that he is a good guy, but for this, that this would not be a crime, but for the fact that he was her teacher, and many other things to basically explain to the judge that Bill is not a predator. At sentencing, Jenny's mom took the stand. She testified that she was very upset with the entire system. She said that when you send your kids to school, you expect teachers to take care of them, to teach them, not to take advantage of them. She felt that Bill took advantage of Jenny and confused and coerced her into doing this. Then it came time for Bill to speak. He wanted to. He didn't have to, but he wanted to speak. He wrote a long letter, and he got up and he read it into the record. He said that he lost control and he should not have. He said that he understood that he hurt a lot of people, all of the people around him, including Jenny. And this should never have happened. And he's extremely, extremely sorry. The sentence was pretty harsh. Bill received 10 years. After Bill's conviction, an appeal followed. And the brief included all of the arguments that I made. And wouldn't you know it, the Court of Appeals of that state ruled in our favor. They felt that Bill should never have been convicted for kidnapping. Statutory rape, yes, but not kidnapping. I'd like to read to you guys part of the opinion of the Court of Appeals. It's very interesting. So they state that the statute, they're talking about the kidnapping statute, makes no exception for consensual sexual conduct, even though the student otherwise has the legal capacity to consent to such conduct. And while the statute requires that the offender be in the position of authority, it does not require proof that the offender exploited or used his or her position of authority to influence or coerce the student to engage in the sexual conduct. This statute, therefore, criminalizes sexual conduct regardless of whether the student actually consented or the offender actually exploited the student. This suggests that the focus is not on harm to the individual student, which in this case was absolutely zero. There was no physical harm to Jenny. And this is what the court discussed. This was one of the issues that they focused on. They go on to state that because the statute is indifferent regarding the student's actual consent or the offender's actual exploitation of the student, we conclude it is the offender's status that is the gravamen of the offense outlined in the statute. The offender's status of school employee or volunteer in a position of authority lends itself to the perception that the offender influenced or exploited the student. It is thus the offender's status that makes the sexual conduct unlawful. Exactly what I argued in trial. But for Bill's position of authority, this would not have been a crime. It is his position of authority, him being a teacher, that made this a crime, made the age of consent go up from 16 to 18. Otherwise, this would not have been a crime. If they would have met anywhere else, this would not have been a crime. And that's what the Court of Appeals agreed with. And that was one of the reasons that they dismissed, they reversed the conviction of kidnapping. Bill prevailed in his appeal, and he served a much shorter sentence just for the statutory rape. He's no longer a teacher, and his wife is no longer with him. He's living his life quietly by himself. You know, there are no winners here in this situation. Bill is certainly not. Neither is Jenny. Her name has been dragged through the mud. But the people that honestly I felt the worst for, really felt bad for them, was Bill's wife and his kids. They certainly didn't deserve any of it. They suffered the most in this whole ordeal. Humiliation, the loss of a husband and father. Their lives were completely turned upside down by Bill. He should have known better. Thank you for watching. If you like content like this, please like, subscribe, and comment. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Tune in next time for more interesting stories. My name is Dmitry Gurovich, Mr. G. This is my spot, and these are my stories.